If you want to take out the set of papers that say addictions at the top, that is the next topic. Before I get started, see how I did that to get extra time? First of all, round of applause for the Trongs and the lunch that they The real question is, how do I keep you out of falling asleep with the food coma and everything, right? Mike brought up an interesting question. We were talking a couple minutes ago. He's like, he wants to ask, and I'll give my answer, but I'm sure the other professionals in the room have an answer as well. But how do you broach that topic with someone that you can tell needs some help? What does that look like? And it kind of segues in a little bit to what I'm going to talk about, but sometimes people don't want help until they want help. You can't ever make someone do something they don't want to do. With addictions, we talk about you can't make somebody hit bottom. You can raise the bottom so that hopefully they'll hit it a little sooner. And we'll talk about that as well, but that's a very good question. My wife, has mentioned things to me and walked away on more than one occasion so that I can think about it and then claim it as my idea later on. It's similar to what Doug shared about Erica as well. And so, but every situation is different. Some people are approachable and some people aren't. And would you be willing to hear something if I talk to you about it? It's kind of touchy, but I think it's important to talk about, depending on your relationship. So I'll say that. Okay, so let's talk about addiction. So I'm not going to be talking a lot about grief today. I'm very passionate about grief and the grief recovery method, but I get to talk about addictions. I guess the more problems you have, then the more subjects you can talk about. So there you go. I'm Steve Jordan, and I'm here today to talk about addictions. And I guess I really enjoy this stuff. I enjoy helping people be real. I grew up a little different, I guess we all do, but my dad died when I was 7. His replacement was an alcoholic. As a young man, he had no business trying to raise orphans, and he was abusive. And I've been through a lot of different losses in our family and my family, murder, obviously divorces, suicide, all kinds of things. So that's what kind of got me into the grief recovery method a couple of years ago. And I've been through that, I've done that, I've processed 6 of my own losses. I did get certified to be, I'm now an advanced grief recovery specialist. And I get to help people and sit in spaces that a lot of people just don't like to sit. But I really do enjoy it. So I got 2 more classes left for my, to finish a master's degree in licensed mental health counseling. So I'll be more officially dangerous at that point. So anyway, I want to talk today about addiction, and I wanted to do that. And I think all of us might just have a frame of reference when we think somebody's addicted, and we have a picture in our mind of what the addict is. And so what I want to do is kind of paint a landscape, just to kind of refresh our memory, especially if you're in good, healthy circles of people. You may not spend a lot of time on the other side, if you will, and maybe lose sight of the realities that are out there. So I got this little paragraph at the top there, and I'm going to read it. It says, 3 neighbors on your block are drug dealers, and your HOA fees help pay their mortgages. Block parties are advertised in your yard with alcohol every day. You take the signs down, the next day they're right back there. The neighbor on your right has a drug dealer that's a permanent tenant. And everyone recommends and trusts the neighbor on your left, and he's on commercials selling drugs. So the first thing you think is like, well, I need to move to a different neighborhood. But this is our neighborhood. Yep. This is Earth. This is life as is. There are 3 countries who function off of the production and wholesale distribution of drugs: Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Colombia. Our neighbors to the south have drug cartels that are very intricately tied to the goings-on down there. Like, they literally have a name. Well, it's like New Cartel, and this whatever cartel. But the twist of that is, like, we all like to go to Mexico for vacation. So it's like your neighbor sells drugs, but he makes really good cupcakes. So it's kind of weird. That next blank down there, how many millions of dollars a year do you think, or how many millions of dollars a year do you believe are spent on advertising alcohol? Guesses. How many millions? 50, 100. How about 90,000 million? $90 billion a year is spent on advertising alcohol consumption. 10% of the drinkers consume 50% of the product. So who are they marketing to? You see the commercials, man, it's like you're on the beach, it's really cool, and you're with your friends, and everybody's teeth are pearly white and they're straight, and everybody's skinny, and it's awesome. You go to a bar at 10:30 on like a given Friday night, and it's a whole other story, right? But that's the message. That is the message. So that is just to kind of say from a global perspective, like drugs and alcohol are woven into the fabric of what we do in our society. It's just a reality. We'll talk about a couple more statistics later on, but 70% of people drink. That's a lot. Next thing down, 13 to 18 metric tons of heroin are consumed annually in the United States. We're like, well, how much is that per person? Like, it's too much, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter, but I am kind of a numbers guy, so I went through and nerded out and figured out what the deal was. You know, it's enough to get the entire population, men, women, and children in the United States high 3 times. Yeah. 1991 to 2011, that 20-year period, legal opioid prescriptions tripled. Tripled. So, wow, isn't that crazy that there's this opioid epidemic now? How do you think that gets going? That's that trusted neighbor on your left that everybody thinks is great, and his commercials are on TV, and he sells drugs. Legal drugs. 1 in 5 deaths are attributed to which drug? What do you think? You said nicotine. Come on, Mindy's overachiever. Nicotine cigarettes. 1 in 5. I mean, everybody knows it's bad, right? I mean, they're like locked away at Kroger. You can't even get to them, and there's labels on them, and there's labels to everything next to them. Like, they're just bad, and yet, still, 1 in 5 deaths still. Next line down. 1 in 8 pages of the DSM-5, which is used for diagnosing mental disorders. 1 in 8 pages of the DSM-5 has addiction tied to it. Whether it is direct or a comorbidity, in other words, part of another disorder. 1 in 8 pages, 13% of the DSM has addiction tied to it. 1% of medical school classes are dedicated to dealing with addiction. There's a bit of a disconnect there. You feel me? About the DSM for 5 seconds. So I took a tax class. I took a couple of tax classes in high school and college for a couple different master's degrees. But like the first 2 classes, we didn't have our textbook yet. So we finally get the textbook. It's this thick, like Bible thickness pages, you know, and everybody's dreading tax class anyway. But the professor's like, this brand new book is out of date. And that's kind of what I'm experiencing going through the DSM-5. I mean, we're working on the DSM-5. It was published, it came out in 2013, right? Which is before so many things. So there's just a delay, and there's a huge amount of discussion about what gets included in that book. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So the second piece of the landscape, so there you kind of see, like, this is what's going on out there in the selling community for drugs and alcohol, and this is what's going on in the medical community when it comes to addictions. The landscape of addiction, let's bring it a little closer to the family culture, and this is where we're going to talk about ACEs. Who knows what ACEs are? Show hands. 50-60% of you. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, and it's a simple assessment. It really is. It's 10 questions. It's yes or no. 5 of the questions have to do with you as an individual. 5 of the questions have to do with what's immediately surrounding you in your family. So is there, emotional neglect? Is there physical abuse? Is there any molestation, and some questions about that, about what is immediately tied to you as an individual, and then another 5 questions that are like, hey, is there addiction in the home? Do you see violence between caregivers? Has anybody gone to prison? Questions of that nature. And it's just a quick and dirty kind of an assessment. And ironically, I'm an orphan. One of the questions is not, are your parents alive? Or did your caregiver die? It's not even there. It's they just said yeah, we already know that you orphans are jacked out. We're gonna ask these other questions instead. But you consider a child to be at risk for health problems and poor behaviors and cognitive issues and all that stuff if you score 4 or higher on that assessment. So if 10 things that are happening that aren't good, if you got 4 of them, you got a really solid chance of having some severe troubles in your life. When it comes to addiction, if you score 5 or more, you have a 7 to 10 times greater level of illicit drug use or addiction issues. That's your chance. If you're 4 or above for ACEs, you have a 1,220% greater likelihood of suicide. So it kind of matters, right? Kind of matters. And you say, well, yeah, okay, so that's fine, but really, how prolific are ACEs anyway? Well, coming down to the next little section here, 25% of kids are beaten by a parent that left marks. 1 out of 4 kids. I'm not talking about spanking. I'm talking about getting beaten and left marks. 1 out of 5 kids are molested. 20%. 33% see physical violence between parents. 25% grow up with alcoholic relatives. 1 out of 8 witness their mom getting beaten. So it's a little more prolific, but again, if we spend time with folks that are decent in life, or you got a circle of friends, or you got a great work family, you got a great church family, you spend the time with those folks, you start to disconnect from the reality of the things as they really are out there in the big bad world. So from that standpoint, and again, I did a lot of years of chemical recovery through the church we were part of, and it was great. It was based off of a disease/moral model. It's a sin problem, and it's behavior modification. We're trying to keep people sober, keep people from doing something. It's very effective, but it's also very limited. But we never really get into the deeper stuff. A lot of this is masking, and a lot of this is coping. I did not come out of the womb smoking a cigarette, how's it going? It didn't really kind of pan out that way. But we take a look at what we know about addiction. I appreciate my esteemed colleague Stephanie Jordan speaking about the grief recovery. But the myths that have to do with the stages of grief, nobody else is doing anything. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came out well, she noticed this thing in this sub-segment of the population, and as soon as anybody hears grief, they just immediately start talking about that. I'm going through school, I'm reading lots of books, some of them are extremely well documented, even up through 2020, when it comes to talking about grief, they still trot out that same stuff. There's a disconnect there. Similarly with addiction, say oh, what, addiction? Where's the 12-step program? Everybody's AA, it's NA, right? And I've got it written down here, I just did a quick search. There's 46 different kinds of 12-step groups out there that have to do with various forms of addiction. And I think they're a great tool. I really do. If you need habits, if you need some perspective, you can go there. I sat in on a recent class that I took, I sat in on some meetings. It's super refreshing. People are super humble. They really, really are. But it is a tool, but it is just one slice of that model, as we're seeing here. When it comes to how a person grows up, how they're raised, the environment that they're raised in, it really highlights a lot more. So as a definition there at the bottom of the page, dependence, cognitive, behavioral, and physiological links to continued use in spite of problems. What we used to say is if you eat broccoli and you throw up and you keep eating broccoli, you have a broccoli problem, right? So in spite of the consequences, it's continued use. And physiological is the latest thing to be added. We're adding things, we're learning things, we're digging into the brain, we're seeing neurological function, and all that's great. What I would say is ACEs give you something to study. Like, there's a brain problem, it's caused by something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If it didn't happen from birth,
Right.
it's happened because of things that have happened to
Right.
you
Right.
and things that you do to yourself.
Yeah.
Quick little caveat, I don't believe in taking responsibility away from the individual. But I think love and compassion is very helpful versus just hard truth,
Right.
right? All right, flip the page. I never set my timer, so there is no time. Just noticed that. And that's twice when I was practicing. I didn't set the timer then either. I have no idea what I'm doing. All right, so this is a more elaborate ACEs pyramid that I obviously put together all by myself. We're going to start at the bottom here. Generational embodiment / historical trauma. If you've got generational poverty going on, if you've got generational oppression going on, that's the backdrop. That's what you're born into, and it's not a choice.
Yeah.
That's just the deal, right? And then social conditions and local context. If you don't have healthy food choices, right? You got a gun store, you got a pawn shop, you got a liquor store, you got a gas station. You see what I'm saying? Like your local context, your social conditions. Neighborhoods that turn on each other. Right? When you're looking for mentors because maybe mom and dad aren't there. What are you getting? And then we talk about adverse childhood experiences. So now something happens to you. And what's your backdrop? And again, what's your support system? Right? This is what we're talking about. You get disrupted neurodevelopment, a book I've recommended a couple different times. The Body Keeps the Score. Good book. I'm loving it by Bessel van der Kolk. So just The Body Keeps the Score. Get that book, but it's great. You got your spine and the brainstem, right, attaching there. That's where basic body function is. Controls your sleep, controls your digestion, right? You're peeing, you're pooping. The very basic things that make a human being do human things is right there. But if you go to sleep or you attempt to go to sleep at night, but you're afraid of what's going to happen when you go to sleep or when you try to sleep, when somebody comes in your room. If you get told things about who you are and your body and your mind, like if you start to have appetite problems, like the things that we are and are among us are affecting the very core of how we are naturally wired to operate.
Right.
You get disrupted neurodevelopment. Now you're coping as a child, right? On top of that, social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. Well, you're sleeping in class, like you can't concentrate. I mean, I had somebody come and give me a test when I was in the 5th grade because I just could not sit still and I was causing problems, right? I had plenty of ACEs in my life, but there was a disconnect. So you get a social, you get an educational disadvantage, right? And then we have adoption of health risk behavior. So to cope, as we get older, maybe we start to mimic what was happening in our home. And that's where we're at. When we're talking about addictions, a lot of times we like to start up here. We start at the symptom. Oh, you're addicted. Oh, you got a problem. You need to stop that.
Right. Yeah.
Right? We're trying to help people get some Zen into their life. We're trying to help people walk and get to know God. Right? It's like, well, you need to stop that.
Yeah.
You need to repent of that behavior.
Right.
It's like, okay, fantastic. Like you're telling me to give up my best friend. Right? The only thing that's reliable. Right? So that's where we're at. We're talking about the addiction, but we're not getting into the rest of the stuff. You can kind of see like we need to paint a broader picture. And helping somebody take that personal responsibility is a lot different when you look at things through a different lens. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And then of course, that continues and they're not loved and people don't get the opportunity to get sober, stay sober in whatever form or fashion we're talking about. You're gonna end up with disease and then you end up with an early death. So there's the ACEs pyramid. It's totally inspiring, right? All right. Let's go to the next box down. You guys, I got to try and get as much in as I can in 30 minutes, so we're just going to rifle through stuff. Addictions, you have process addictions and you have substance addictions. Substance addictions, I mean, there's so many statistics out there. We didn't even talk about youth, marijuana use. There's so much data that's out there, which is really encouraging because once you start getting the data, then you start getting the conversations, and then of course the money starts flowing. And there's programs and there's things, and we're trying to help. But for substance addictions, it's anything: sugar to meth, prescriptions, caffeine, process addictions. Food is over there. We do need food to survive. even though it is something that we are ingesting. Exercise, work, sex, gambling, internet, gaming, anything that can help us avoid. I'm actually working with someone right now who's having trouble because all their problems are crashing down on them because their exercise addiction isn't working anymore. Their body stopped working, their body broke down, and now they're having to face the demons. Again, substance use, 70% of people consume alcohol yearly, not unhealthily, but it is there. 54% consume caffeine. I'm not going to say anything about that. If you look over to the right, process addictions when it comes to pornography, for instance. You take LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and Netflix, put them all together, it's less content on the web than porn. Of the 4 largest producers of other people's content online, you've got Wikipedia, Microsoft, Netflix, and Pornhub. That's reality. You got similar warning signs with the process addiction as far as isolation and that kind of thing. On the substance side, it affects 8 neurotransmitters. One thing I'll say, again, The Body Keeps the Score is a very good book. We talk about neurotransmitters and the serotonin and the blockers and what happens. You know, we sound like really scientific and intelligent, but we're not. But it's akin to, as they say in that book, trying to learn about an entire engine by studying gasoline flow. When we talk about the neurotransmitter things, so there's a whole lot of other stuff going on with the brain, but substances completely affect the transmission of things and getting the brain to talk to itself correctly. The effects continue after discontinuation of use. I work with a guy who did so much cocaine that it literally ate away all of the cartridge in his face. So things just have a way of affecting your life even after you stop. Obviously, substance, you get a tolerance there, and it takes more to get the same high. Withdrawal can be deadly.
Yeah.
Literally, like we just quit, you need to stop.
Yeah.
Like maybe you shouldn't say that,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we're not qualified to make that comment or that assessment.
Yep.
And again, when it comes to substance and process, the DSM-5 is very heavy with substances. The DSM-5 is very light on process addiction. Like gambling is in there. It was in the DSM-4. It is also in the DSM-5, a little bit more developed, as it were. But again, we're talking about working from a manual, if you will, published in 2013. So it's awful slow on the uptake. Next page. Nobody's taking a nap yet? No. All right. I just want to give a little bit, again, context and picture. AA in its 4th year. Oh, by the way, when it came to ACEs, Bill W., the guy that started, it's like, well, how big of a deal is it? Well, wouldn't you know that Bill W., the guy that started AA, had alcoholic buddies, but both of his parents abandoned him and his sister. He was raised by his paternal grandmother instead. His paternal grandfather was an alcoholic. So like we know, like there's ACEs like right away in the guy's life without even knowing anything else was going on with him. So, but AA in its 4th year, they had 100 members. Now there's 2 million. There's 87,000 groups around the world for Alcoholics Anonymous. NA, 1978, they had 200 members. Now there's 70,000 groups for NA, which is awesome. Gambling. One group has to serve 250,000 people. Not the public, but actual people that have problems with gambling. See the difference? Sex groups. One group for 1.08 million sufferers. Internet. One group for 3 million clients. So you can see the disparity of where we're at when it comes to dealing with addiction outside of what's kind of in our wheelhouse.
Right.
We've got an AA kind of a model. It's everywhere. It's everybody's frame of reference. It's not really holistic. And then for other process addictions and things people are going through, we're talking about COVID and how much more everybody's on the computer now, right? Like there's got to be an Amazon Anonymous, like well on its way. I don't know anything about that at all. I come home and there's a new package from Amazon. Like, gosh, what is that? I have no idea. It's like, well, I ordered it. You're like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. 80% of adolescents play games. It's not like Atari back in the day, right? It's like very immersive. There is a bit of connectivity because they do get online with their friends and they're talking to people, and that's what I tell myself. But it's a very different thing.
Yeah.
Gaming these days is a very, very different thing. $154 billion is spent on legal gambling every year. That's a lot. But again, the help, one group serves 250,000 gambling addicts. Like the infrastructure is just very behind. So there's things that are kind of working against us. There's 337 times more public funds spent on substance versus process addiction treatment. So it's just still developing, and it's slow, and it's behind, and that's the scorecard. That's really what we're working with, particularly if you're a church group of people that likes to pull people in and bring people in.
Yep.
We can bring them in, and we can help them through Bible studies and connecting relationships and things like this, but we're trying to undo a lot of stuff, right? Okay, so you got that bottom box here, a moral model, the disease model, psychological, public health, sociocultural, syndrome model. There's so many different models that are out there for helping people with addictions. And it's very interesting, and I'm learning. I mean, I'm rifling off all this stuff, but trust me, I'm learning right alongside of you. I learned how to do things one way. So it's very, very interesting for me. But I would say models should be fueled by love and compassion, complemented by science and reason.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of it forever was just purely cognitive. What are you doing that for? Stop. It's like, thank you. I didn't realize it was passion. Thank you so much. But it's not necessarily love and compassion, it's just annoying. We don't know what to do with those people. So if you just stop, that'd be great. Or just, I don't want to see it. Right? So love and compassion is kind of a big deal. Also, relapse as a part of recovery, not a failure of it. Right? Again, those 12-step groups are very good. They'll also have you end up believing things about yourself that aren't true. Defining ourselves by a problem, that's not God's intention.
Wow.
If we're more than overcomers, right? We're children of God, right? Like, hi, I'm so-and-so and I'm an addict. A label forever, right?
Yeah.
You relapse, like you're starting over, like now you're back to day one. No, not really, but I'm sure you're going to learn something from that. And I know it's hard for when you love somebody very close to you who disappoints with the relapse. I'm not saying it's easy, right? I'm not saying it's easy. Okay. And yeah, like I said earlier, tough love isn't the only love. Addiction as a condition and not an identity, as I said before. So people, comfort, peace, full life, that's the target over sobriety. When I talk to people, I'm like, look, I'm not interested in it. It's been so long since, you screwed up. I'm more interested in, like, what are you going to look like 5 years from now? What are you going to look like 10 years from now?
Yes.
What are you going to look like when life gets really hard? You're going to go back to an old friend. How can I help you be prepared not to do that? Rather than, how did you do today? Right?
Come on.
It's like a whole other deal. All right, last page. Questions and items to ponder. On the left-hand side, even talking, listen to guys like Gordon Peterson, is a really logical philosopher guy, but, what are you afraid will happen if you stop? And again, this is part of that raising of the bottom, just getting people to think about, because you don't want to ask why. It's a great little trick of the trade that I've learned. When you're talking to people, don't ask them why. It's very confrontational.
Yep.
It's accusatory. And like they're going to give you a good cognitive answer. Like, well, because, don't ask why. But just ask these kinds of questions. What are you afraid will happen if you stop? Talking about fear is a big deal. Fear is a huge thing in addiction. What are you afraid will happen if you don't? Well, if I stop, then I'll lose friends. Well, that tells you a lot. Well, if I stop, then I'll withdraw. That tells you a lot, right? But it's just, and you don't even have to force any kinds of answers or anything like that, right? What are you afraid is going to happen if you don't stop? Well, job, family, like things are going to start to happen. It's helping to see a trajectory. What or who can you run away from? What or whom can you run towards that's safe? Good questions. Some people say, like, I need help. I just talked to somebody very recently, very close. He knows he needs help. I don't have to provide all of the avenues, but I can ask some questions, right? Get some people somewhere. And just being there for people, just being there, helping somebody when there's triggers. When you feel like there's just a severe hopelessness as an addict, and I just have to go drink or whatever it is. If you can be there, just a phone call, it gives a little sliver of hope, and hope's not a bad word. People learn to cope differently. For the helper on the right, how can we give hope alongside expectation? Just think about that. And we can talk later about it. How do you give hope alongside expectation? There's some expectation if you want to maintain a relationship with somebody. And boundaries, I believe, is something that Michelle is hopefully going to touch on here in a little bit. But what does compassion and truth look like? How can you be compassionate and still be honest? But be full of compassion. Knowing, depending on where the person's at, they're going to feel attacked anyway, potentially. But being prepared yourself for that. The addiction is the most important thing in the addict's life. Like I mentioned earlier, you're talking to somebody about giving up their best friend. The only comfort, the only coping mechanism they've ever known and potentially had modeled for them, right? What tangible thing can we replace it with? Life as is isn't enough. And remembering that's a big deal. Patience, kindness, and the golden rule. Not like this is what the Bible says about what you should be doing. But like, actually, I'm supposed to be the fruit of the Spirit, not the user of the Bible in that way, right? But the fruit of the Spirit, love and patience. Those are the things that need to come out of me, right? So that's about all the time I've got. So thanks for letting me talk.